One day, there was a wizard with incredible powers. However, instead of using them selfishly, this wizard used his magic to help workers develop his territory. The wizard's name was Wendelin, a noble who had earned numerous titles thanks to his achievements for the kingdom. As Wendelin worked on improving his land, his subordinates often asked him to use his magic. Even though it was exhausting, Wendelin complied, as he was used to working hard in his past life in the modern world. Wendelin vividly remembered the last day in his original world. He had just come home from the office and was about to eat dinner when, suddenly, he found himself in a different world, inhabiting the body of a child. At first, Wendelin thought he was just tired, so he closed his eyes, hoping everything would go back to normal. But when he opened them again, his new father was waking him up, instructing him to greet the guests and introduce himself. Panicked because he didn't even know his own name, Wendelin was relieved when his older brother, Eric, stepped in to help. Eric explained to the guests that this was his younger brother, Wendelin. Eric also informed Wendelin that today was their eldest brother's wedding to the second daughter of another noble family. Realizing his family had connections with nobility, Wendelin felt a little relieved, believing that as the third son, his future would be secure. The next day, however, Wendelin noticed something odd. Despite the grand celebration the day before, his family lived a surprisingly modest lifestyle. When he asked Eric about this, Eric explained that although they were nobles, they were poor. To maintain appearances, they would occasionally host lavish events, but once the festivities were over, they had to save money and live frugally. Still optimistic about his position as the third son, Wendelin was shocked to learn that he wasn't the third but actually the eighth child in the family. With this revelation, he began to study the demographics and geography of their territory. Just by looking at maps and population data, Wendelin realized that his future would be far from easy. Not long after, Eric and two other siblings announced they were leaving home. After their older brother, Kuruto, got married, they decided to move to the capital to seek better opportunities. Wendelin thought there might be an inheritance waiting for them, but it turned out only Kuruto and the second eldest received land as their share. The rest of the siblings were expected to leave the house to ease the family's financial burden. Eric advised Wendelin to prepare for his future, as he would eventually face the same fate. Determined to change his destiny, Wendelin wanted to study hard. Unfortunately, there were no valuable books at home. However, while playing with a magic crystal, Wendelin discovered that he had a natural talent for magic. Despite this, he couldn't fully activate his abilities because he lacked guidance. One day, while playing outside, Wendelin's latent power caught the attention of a traveling magician. The magician approached him and taught him the basics of using magic. After demonstrating how to harness his abilities, the magician offered to train Wendelin further. Wendelin really wanted to train with the magician but hesitated because he didn't have the money to pay. However, the magician reassured him that he didn't need any payment, leaving Wendelin with no reason to refuse. Before they began, the magician advised Wendelin to keep his magical abilities a secret. If others found out, they might see him as a potential ruler, which could create conflict with his eldest brother. As the eighth child in the family, Wendelin's magical prowess could easily allow him to claim leadership, but that would be dangerous. The next day, Wendelin began his training. The first lesson focused on balancing his magical capacity to match or surpass those with greater reserves. From these exercises, the magician quickly realized that Wendelin was even more talented than he'd initially thought. Despite his young age and inexperience, Wendelin's magical capacity rivaled, if not exceeded, his teacher's expectations. When Wendelin's father and Kuruto noticed him playing with a magic crystal, they laughed it off, assuming he had no magical aptitude. Little did they know that Wendelin had already mastered advanced magic within just a few days of training. To keep his practice a secret, Wendelin would go out, looking for vegetables. However, since many of the vegetables he claimed to search for were rare, Kuruto began to suspect he might be using magic. On the other hand, Wendelin's training continued to progress. With wind magic, he learned to hunt animals to share meals with his teacher. His teacher, however, strictly prohibited him from venturing too deep into the forest, as it was home to dangerous monsters that ordinary humans couldn't handle. While the forest also contained valuable herbs and rare resources, most who entered never returned. Lately, Kuruto had been keeping a close eye on Wendelin. He feared that if Wendelin had magical talent, he might one day challenge his authority. However, Wendelin had no desire to become a ruler, finding the position far too troublesome. His teacher suggested he become an adventurer instead. As a former adventurer himself, the magician believed Wendelin would thrive in the outside world. When Wendelin brought up this idea with his parents, his father pointed out a major problem. They didn't have the money to send him to an adventurer's academy. Even so, Wendelin didn't give up. With his teacher's guidance, his confidence grew, and he believed he could overcome any obstacle. However, since the academy was far away, Wendelin needed to learn flying magic and teleportation magic to get there. 2 weeks into his training, his teacher suddenly announced that the next day would be their last session. Wendelin was shocked. He had only just started learning flying magic and wasn't proficient yet. That night, Wendelin heard from his father that someone had seen an undead creature in the forest. Concerned for his teacher's safety, Wendelin rushed to him and urged him to seek refuge at their home. To Wendelin's shock, the teacher revealed that he was the undead everyone had seen. As his final lesson, the magician asked Wendelin to purify him before he turned into a monstrous undead. With great effort, Wendelin successfully purified his teacher. Wendelin lived in solitude for a while, and when he came of age, he left his family to study at an adventurer's academy. At first, Wendelin struggled with his communication skills, especially since the other students seemed to ignore him during introductions. This made him anxious and worried that he wouldn't be able to form a party with anyone. However, there was a reason why Wendelin felt isolated. It turned out his classmates didn't dislike him. They actually wanted to team up with him. They believed Wendelin had a bright future, and since most academy parties continued working together after graduation, being in his party would guarantee them a stable life. While Luis and Ina were observing him, Erwin suddenly approached Wendelin and suggested forming a party together. Meanwhile, Wendelin was still waiting for a good opportunity to bond with his classmates. Unfortunately, they were too busy talking about him, leaving him no chance to speak with anyone. Most students at the academy didn't receive allowances from their families, so the academy encouraged them to hunt to earn money. While other students tried to prove themselves by bringing back impressive catches, Wendelin's skills were on a completely different level. When he presented his massive haul, everyone gave up, realizing they couldn't compete with him. Once again, Wendelin found himself alone. Even though most had given up, Erwin, Luis, and Ina were determined to keep up with Wendelin. They planned to catch an even bigger prey to earn his respect. But during their hunt, they were ambushed by a pack of giant wolves. Struggling to defend themselves, they were lucky that Wendelin happened to be nearby. Hoping to make friends, Wendelin jumped in and saved them from the wolves. However, after witnessing his overwhelming abilities firsthand, Erwin, Luis, and Ina decided to stop trying to compete with him. A few days later, the academy announced that the students were invited to a garden party hosted by Blant Raider, a high-ranking noble of the Helmet Kingdom. Luis and Ina, hoping to secure positions under the noble, dressed their best to impress him. But at the party, Blant Raider ignored everyone and instead invited Wendelin to a private conversation. Feeling awkward being alone, Wendelin asked if his 3 classmates could join him inside. He claimed they were members of his party. Inside, Wendelin was introduced to a mage named Barantag, who happened to be the teacher of Alfred, the undead mage who had previously trained Wendelin. Excited to hear about Alfred, Barantag asked Wendelin to share stories of their time together. During their conversation, Wendelin returned various magical tools that had belonged to Alfred. As thanks, Barantag gifted Wendelin 1,000 gold coins and a large inherited estate. With this wealth, Wendelin no longer had to worry about his finances, though he felt uneasy about living in such a massive house alone. After everything was settled, Wendelin finally explained to his classmates that he genuinely wanted to form a party with them. Although they felt insecure about their abilities, Wendelin convinced them to join him, marking the start of their official party. One day, Wendelin invited his 3 friends to attend his brother's wedding. At first, their journey went smoothly. However, as their magical ship entered a thick fog, they suddenly encountered an undead ancient dragon. The passengers panicked and demanded the crew do something. To calm everyone, the crew assured them that Barantag was already dealing with the dragon. However, even Barantag couldn't defeat it because the dragon was undead, and the only way to stop it was to purify it with holy magic. Coincidentally, Wendelin knew holy magic. So, he was asked to fly up to the dragon and purify it while Barantag stayed on the ship to protect the passengers. With this arrangement, Wendelin could focus on the battle. After a tough fight, he managed to purify the dragon's bones.
すが師匠の師匠。動く無形に集中できる。おとなしくしてろ。
He almost forgot to collect the valuable materials the dragon dropped, but Barentag reminded him to store them in his magic pouch. With the dragon dealt with, their journey to the capital continued. Wendelin was excited to shop in the capital, but Barentag's old merchant friend warned him it might be difficult after fighting the dragon. Wendelin didn't understand why but was told he'd find out once they arrived. After a long journey, Wendelin and his group finally reached the capital, only to be stopped by a massive royal guard force. Erwin assumed they were in trouble, but it turned out the soldiers were there to escort Wendelin to the palace. The king wanted to reward him for defeating the dragon and protecting the passengers. At the palace, Wendelin was granted the noble title of 6th-rank baron. In addition, the kingdom awarded him the Twin Dragon Medal. Eric was stunned that his younger brother became a noble during a trip to a wedding. Moreover, Wendelin's rank was now higher than their father's. While Eric was proud, he also realized that Wendelin would now face the complex and exhausting politics of noble life. Wendelin's original goal was simply to attend his brother's wedding, but his trip was delayed further by disputes over the payment for the dragon crystal he turned in. Nobody wanted to back down until Cardinal Hohenheim stepped in to mediate. As Wendelin was leaving the palace, he encountered a strange man who, impressed by Wendelin's bright future as a noble, showcased his skills, hoping Wendelin would hire him. The next day, Wendelin faced a new problem. His family's reputation was at risk because they hadn't presented a proper wedding gift yet. The gift needed to be luxurious, and none of his siblings could afford it, leaving it all to Wendelin. Frustrated by the burdens of being a noble, Wendelin still managed to handle everything with resilience. Despite the challenges, there were moments that made Wendelin happy, especially while he spent time in the capital under the guidance of Cardinal Hohenheim. Henhei invited Wendelin to a purification ceremony, an event that only a select few are usually invited to. Taking the opportunity, Wendelin offered a gift to him. A little later, Henhei introduced Wendelin to his granddaughter, Elise. The moment Wendelin saw her, he realized Elise had magical abilities similar to his own. Henhei confirmed this, explaining that Elise possessed healing magic and was often referred to as the Sacred Maiden. With such exceptional skills, Wendelin initially assumed Elise would pursue a life as a priestess. However, Henhei shared that he wanted Elise to live a normal life and marry someone. Seeing how beautiful Elise was, Wendelin jokingly remarked that many would probably compete for her hand and that he might even join in. To his surprise, Henhei took him seriously, as he had already planned to arrange a marriage between Wendelin and Elise. And just like that, a minute after meeting, they became engaged. When Wendelin returned to his brother's house, he vented his worries about the engagement to Elise. He was concerned about their future since they barely knew each other. Eric reassured him, saying such engagements were common among nobles. In fact, Eric himself hadn't met his wife until their wedding day. To clear his head, Wendelin decided to walk around the city. To avoid being recognized, his siblings and friends disguised him as a clown. Despite the costume, people still recognized him and swarmed him, desperate to work for him.
あの人だって絶対にバレないから。
バウマイスター卿愉快な格好をしておられる。歯並びがバウマ少し殺しの英雄様だ。バウマイスター卿どうか私を貸し。では
After the commotion, Eric advised Wendelin to start recruiting followers. Erwin immediately volunteered, and Wendelin accepted without hesitation, even though the position of a noble's follower was highly significant. Later, Wendelin secretly met with Elise to talk about their sudden engagement. Elise thought it was a great arrangement, saying everyone in the capital knew how remarkable Wendelin was. She was thrilled to have the chance to be his wife. When Louis and Ina found out that Erwin had become Wendelin's follower, they didn't want to be outdone. They decided to aim higher by competing to become Wendelin's concubines. Determined to win his favor, they vowed to work hard to achieve their goal. The next day, Wendelin was invited to a formal meeting with Elise. Despite it being their first official meeting, they didn't talk much and mainly commented on the food until the meeting ended. Following his servant's advice, Wendelin decided to give Elise a gift. He took her to a store and bought her a ring. The ring had the ability to store immense magical power, so Elise assumed Wendelin had chosen it to be useful to her someday. But Wendelin casually explained that he had simply picked it because it looked good on her. After observing him, the servant concluded that Wendelin was difficult to figure out. Unlike most men who treated Elise like a sacred maiden, Wendelin saw her as just an ordinary young woman.